When German prisoner Clara Wendler arrived at an Iowa farm in October 1945, she expected cruelty. She had buried her own children and prepared herself for hatred from the enemy. But the woman who opened the door didn't offer anger. She placed her baby into Clara's arms. Why would an American mother, who had already lost a son to German fire, trust an enemy prisoner with her own child? And what did Clara discover in that farmhouse kitchen that she would carry back to Germany for decades? The truck from the prisoner camp stopped in front of a white farmhouse with blue shutters, a red barn, and cornfields cut down to gold stubble. The sky was wider than any sky Clara had known in Europe. A young corporal helped her down from the back of the truck. "Work detail," he said. "You'll be here until sundown. Do what Mrs. Whitaker tells you." Clara nodded. She was 38 years old, though the war had made her look older. Her hair was pinned under a plain scarf. Her hands were thin and rough. She had worked as a clerk in an army supply office near Kassel, counting blankets, fuel tins, and boots for men who were sent east and west and often did not return. She had not commanded anyone. She had not saved anyone either. That was what she carried. The farmhouse door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch holding a baby against her shoulder. Clara stopped breathing for one moment. The baby was round-cheeked, warm, alive, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. One small hand rested against the woman's collar, opening and closing as if the world belonged to it. The woman on the porch was perhaps 45. Brown hair streaked with gray. Clear eyes. A working dress. No softness in the face, but no theater of anger either. "I'm Eleanor Whitaker," she said. "You can call me Mrs. Whitaker." "Clara Wendler," Clara answered. "I know." The baby made a small sound and pressed her face into Eleanor's neck. Eleanor adjusted her gently. "This is Grace." The name struck Clara with a cruelty no one had intended. "Grace." She looked away. Eleanor noticed, but said nothing. A man came from the barn carrying a coil of rope over one shoulder. Tall, lean, sun-browned, with the slow movements of someone who had spent his life measuring weather. "My husband, Samuel," Eleanor said. Samuel nodded once. "Ma'am." It was a strange word to give an enemy prisoner. Clara did not know what to do with it. The corporal handed Eleanor a paper. "She's approved for kitchen work, garden clearing, laundry, and light barn work. No tools without supervision." Samuel glanced at Clara's hands. "She can start with the apples," he said. Wind dropped half the north row. Eleanor looked at the corporal. "We'll feed her at noon." The corporal hesitated. "That's not required." "I didn't ask what was required." The corporal looked at Samuel. Samuel only said, "She'll eat." That was the first thing about the Whitakers that frightened Clara. They did not sound kind. They sounded decided. For the first hour, Clara gathered fallen apples into bushel baskets, while Samuel repaired a fence nearby. He did not stare at her. He did not avoid her either. He worked as if her presence was neither an honor nor an insult, simply another fact of the day. The baby's cry came from the house once, high and sudden. Clara dropped an apple. Samuel looked up. "You all right?" "Yes." He studied her for 1 second too long, then returned to the fence. At noon, Eleanor came to the back door. "Wash up." Clara wiped her hands on her skirt. "I can eat outside." "No." "In the barn, then." "No." Eleanor stepped aside and opened the kitchen door wider. At the table, Clara did not move. In Germany, near the end, women had stood in lines for bread with faces like empty rooms. In the camp, food came on trays and tin plates. But a kitchen table was different. A kitchen table belonged to a family. "I am a prisoner," Clara said. "I know. I worked outside." "Then wash your hands." There was no pleading in Eleanor's voice. No performance of mercy. Just the plain tone of a woman who had decided that if someone worked on her farm, that person would not be fed like an animal. Clara washed at the pump. Inside, the kitchen smelled of coffee, potatoes, ham, and fresh bread. The smell nearly broke her composure. Samuel sat at one end of the table. Eleanor placed Grace in a wooden cradle near the stove, then set out plates. Clara remained standing. Samuel looked at the empty chair. "Food gets cold." She sat. Eleanor served her first. Not leftovers. Not scraps. Potatoes with gravy. Green beans. A slice of ham. Bread thick enough to hold warmth. Butter in a small dish. Clara stared at the plate. "I cannot take this." "You can," Eleanor said. "There is too much." "There is enough." Clara looked at the baby in the cradle. Grace waved one small fist in her sleep. "My sons were hungry," Clara said before she could stop herself. The room went still. Eleanor's hand paused over the coffee pot. Clara lowered her eyes. "I am sorry." "How old?" Eleanor asked. Clara swallowed. 5 and 7. Samuel's knife stopped moving. The silence that followed was not empty. It had weight. Eleanor poured coffee into Clara's cup. "Eat before it cools." Clara picked up her fork. The potatoes were hot. The bread was soft. The ham tasted of salt and smoke and a life that had not collapsed. She ate slowly because eating quickly would have felt like begging. After the meal, Clara rose at once. "I will wash dishes." Eleanor nodded. "You will." That, too, helped. Pity would have humiliated her. Work gave her somewhere to put her hands. For 3 weeks, Clara came to the Whitaker farm twice a week. She peeled apples, scrubbed laundry, fed chickens, sorted jars in the cellar, and helped Eleanor prepare food for winter. Samuel spoke little, but always with the same steady courtesy. If he gave an order, it was clear. If she completed a task well, he said so. The house confused her most. There was no abundance in the wasteful sense. Nothing careless. Flour was measured, bacon grease saved, jars reused, scraps fed to chickens. But there was a confidence in the place. A belief that tomorrow would arrive and require breakfast. Clara had not lived inside that belief for years. Grace was always nearby. In the cradle. On a quilt. Against Eleanor's shoulder. In a basket near the laundry line. Blinking at sunlight as if it had been made for her inspection. Clara tried not to look. She failed. One afternoon, Eleanor found her standing in the kitchen doorway while Grace kicked beneath a white blanket on the floor. The baby laughed at nothing. Clara turned away quickly. Eleanor said, "You can look at her." "I should not." "Why?" Clara's answer came out thin. "Because I want to." Eleanor said nothing for a long moment. Then she bent, lifted Grace, and held her out. Clara stepped back. "No. She won't break." "I cannot." Eleanor kept the baby in her arms. "I did not say you had to. I asked whether you wanted to." Clara looked at Grace's face. Healthy, open, unafraid. Everything her own children had not been allowed to remain. "My hands are German," Clara whispered. Eleanor's expression changed then. Not softening, deepening. "My son Matthew died in France," she said. 22 years old. He was killed by German fire outside a town whose name I still cannot pronounce. Clara closed her eyes. "I am sorry. I know what your country did. I know what our boys crossed the ocean to stop." Eleanor looked down at the baby, then back at Clara. "But this child will not learn courage from me by watching me be cruel to a woman who has already buried her own." Clara covered her mouth. Eleanor stepped closer. "Hold out your arms." This time, Clara obeyed. Grace was placed against her carefully. The baby was heavier than Clara expected. Warm through the blanket. Solid. Alive. Her head settled into the crook of Clara's elbow, as if no history stood between them. Clara did not move. Grace opened her eyes. Blue. Serious. Unknowing. Clara began to cry, without sound. Eleanor looked away, giving her the dignity of not being watched. Clara sat in silence, holding the child, tears running down her face. For the first time in years, something inside her that had been locked away began to loosen. But what did she carry with her when she left that farm? What stayed with her through the long years after the war? Through hunger, rebuilding, and silence? And how did one afternoon in an Iowa kitchen change the way she would see an entire country for the rest of her life? If this story is staying with you, leaving a like helps more people find it. And if there's something about this moment that touched you, I'd really like to hear your thoughts in the comments. Samuel entered from the back door, saw them, and stopped. For a moment, Clara feared he would take the baby away. Instead, he removed his hat. Then he crossed quietly to the shelf, picked up a small box camera, and looked at Eleanor. Eleanor nodded. "No," Clara said. But the word had no strength. Samuel took the photograph. Grace slept through it. After that day, something changed. Not quickly, not in words. Eleanor still corrected Clara's work when it needed correcting. Samuel still watched the time and the tools. The corporal still counted her at arrival and departure. But Eleanor began leaving Grace near Clara while she kneaded dough. Samuel asked Clara once whether Germans stacked firewood differently, and listened to the answer as if it mattered. One evening, when rain made the road too muddy for the truck, the corporal arrived late and found Clara sitting at the kitchen table, mending one of Grace's small blankets while Eleanor canned apples beside her. The corporal looked uncertain. Eleanor did not. "She's finishing the seam," she said. The corporal waited outside. In November, Clara's name appeared on a transfer list. She was to be moved east before repatriation. Her last day at the Whitaker farm came with a hard frost on the fields. Clara worked without speaking much. She cleaned the kitchen shelves twice, though they did not need it. She folded laundry too carefully. She avoided looking at Grace until Eleanor finally said, "You're making this harder by pretending not to care." Clara stood with a dish towel in her hands. "In my life, caring has not protected anything." "No," Eleanor said, "but it has kept some things human." Before the truck came, Eleanor handed Clara a brown paper parcel. Clara opened it. Inside was a small wool blanket. Pale blue, worn at the edge, neatly washed. "No," Clara said at once. "This is for the baby." It was Matthew's first. Clara went still. Eleanor's voice remained even. Then it was Grace's. Now it is yours. I cannot take your son's blanket. You can carry it back across the ocean, Eleanor said. And when you think America was only barbed wire and guards, you can remember it was also a kitchen table in Iowa. Clara pressed the blanket to her chest. Then Samuel came from the barn and handed her a small envelope. The photograph came back from town. Inside was the picture. Clara sat in the Whitaker kitchen, holding Grace in her arms. Her face was wet with tears, but calm in a way she did not remember feeling. On the back, Eleanor had written, Grace Whitaker, held by Clara Wendler. Iowa, 1945. Clara looked up. Why would you give this to me? Eleanor's eyes shone, but her voice held. Because one day you may need proof that someone trusted you with something precious. The truck horn sounded. Clara wanted to say many things. Apologies. Thanks. Names of the dead. Names of the living, baby. Clara sat down before reading the rest. Mother told me you were very gentle. She said you had lost children, and that she trusted you with me because grief should not be allowed to make the world smaller. Clara touched the photograph on her desk. I am 18 now. I will be training as a nurse next year. Mother thought you might like to know that the baby you held grew up safe. The letter blurred. At the bottom, Grace had added one final line. Mother says to tell you the blanket was never meant to stay in one country forever. Clara folded the letter carefully. Then she opened the drawer, took out the old blue blanket, and held it against her face. It no longer smelled of Iowa. It no longer smelled of Grace. But somewhere inside its worn threads was a farmhouse kitchen, a quiet American father, a mother who had buried a son. What came out was smaller. I will remember your house. Eleanor nodded. See that you do. Years passed. Germany rebuilt slowly, with patched roofs, thin soup, and children who learned to read beside windows that had once been broken. Clara found work in a school office, then in a relief bureau, then anywhere records needed careful hands. She kept two things in her drawer, a blue baby blanket, and a photograph from Iowa. In 1963, a letter arrived with an American stamp. The handwriting was young, careful, and unfamiliar. Dear Mrs. Wendler, my name is Grace Whitaker. You probably do not remember me, but my mother says you held me when I was and still refused to become cruel, and a baby placed into enemy arms as if mercy were not weakness, but inheritance. Clara sat alone in the rebuilt school office while children shouted in the yard outside. For the first time in many years, she did not think of America as the country that had defeated hers. She thought of it as the country that had trusted her to hold Grace.